The United States says that 3 members of its armed forces have been killed and dozens more wounded in a drone attack near a base on Jordan's border with Syria. U.S. officials say that the drone struck near a barracks at the base in the Ruk-ban region. It is the first time that a strike has killed American soldiers in the area since the start of the Israel-Hamas war. U.S. President Joe Biden blamed Iran-backed militants for the attack and has vowed to respond. Iran denies any involvement.
Resistance groups in the region do not take orders from the Islamic Republic of Iran with regard to their decision-making or actions. While Iran does not welcome the development of conflict in the region, it does not interfere with the resistance group's decisions on how to support the Palestinian nation or defend themselves and their people against any aggression or occupation.
And for more on that, let's bring in Middle East analyst Daniel Gerlach. He joins us. He's editor-in-chief of the magazine Zenith, which focuses on the Arab and the Islamic world. Welcome to the program, and thank you so much for joining us. I mean, we just heard there that statement from Iran seeming to try to distance themselves from this strike. I'd like to ask you, financing aside, do you think that Tehran is strategically involved in strikes like the one on U.S. troops in Jordan? What did you make of the statement?
Well, I think Iran is involved in structuring and motivating this alliance, this plethora of militias, mostly Shia-oriented militias in the region. However, I think these groups also work at their own behest and have their own timetable. And I think that is also the plausible deniability for the Iranians is also essential here. So this is more, it's a financial, it's a logistic, it's an ideological support. But as we have seen in the past, I do not think that Iran is coordinating every individual strike. It is not in the strategic interest of the Iranians to do that. And they see how that these groups and these militias also operate independently, but it actually contribute to the overall deterrence of Iran in the region. However, what happened now is the killing of 3 U.S. service members, which probably did not go according to plan, because before these militias made actually sure that they would inflict harm and that they would provoke the Americans, but make sure that they wouldn't cross a certain red line. And the killing of U.S. servicemen is certainly a red line that the Americans need to respond, and that puts also Iran on the spot.
And now there are reports that Iran-backed fighters in East Syria have started evacuating their posts in anticipation of a U.S. counterstrike. Do you expect Washington to launch airstrikes there? What sort of U.S. response could be anticipated?
Well, you know, the fighting, the shadow war that is going on between the United States and its allies and these Iran-backed militias in the region is very complex, and it's happening on various fronts. It happens in Syria, on the Syrian-Jordanian border, specifically that triangle of Ruk-ban between Iraq, Syria, and Jordan happens in Iraq and in other places. I've just returned from Baghdad, and last week, while I was in Baghdad, there was a U.S. strike on a Shia militia group southeast of Baghdad in a place called Jurf al-Sakhr, which killed several alleged militiamen. And I think this attack could be seen as a response to that U.S. attack, which itself was a response to an attack on the Ain al-Assad airbase in Iraq. So this conflict escalates on various fronts in various countries, and it's very difficult for the respective governments of these countries to stay out of it. They don't want to be drawn into this, certainly not Iraq, certainly not Jordan. But we have seen a number of border incidents, and it's so far it seemed like most of the fighting is happening in Syria itself, on Syrian territory, but it can happen elsewhere too, as we see.
And it's interesting because we've seen since Hamas's terror attacks on October 7th and Israel's response in Gaza, the vast majority of world leaders and diplomats have stressed the importance of preventing a wider regional escalation, as you've highlighted there. Would you say that this has been a failure? Are mistakes being made?
A lot of mistakes are being made, but the fact that you want to prevent a major regional escalation doesn't mean that you would not act in self-defense or in response to some of those attacks. So the logic is, on the one hand, all sides want to prevent a major regional escalation. On the other hand, they do tit for tat. Whenever they're being attacked, they want to strike back. And these like retribution strikes major harm can happen, and this can lead to another escalation. So whereas many parties in the region, not all of them, by the way, want to avoid a regional escalation, the regional escalation is happening. And this is, unfortunately, the logic of deterrence and of retribution that we have been seeing for a long time. For America and Iran, this can result in a major problem, because at one point, they would either have to engage in really meaningful diplomatic negotiations, how to prevent this from happening, or we would see this being taken to another level soon.
You mentioned the multiple strikes and responses, and I'd like to know how you see the strike now in Jordan. Does this drone strike mean another front has now opened up in the already volatile Middle East, or do you expect that this could potentially be a one-off that can be contained?
No, the front already exists, and not with regard to Jordan, but mainly with regard to Syria and to Iraq, where these militias operate. In the case of Iraq, against the will of the government. In the case of Syria, with a certain consent and support of the government. But this place where the strike happens is a strategically very important place. It's in the eastern Badia, like the southern desert of Syria, as I mentioned before, a triangle between Iraq, Jordan and Syria. And the Americans had been there initially to fight Islamic State militants, so-called Daesh, from this area. And it's become some sort of a no man's land, because the Americans are there. And of course, nobody should move any closer to the base without taking the risk of being attacked. Then you have these groups that are saying they're fighting American occupation of Syrian territory. Actually, it's a no man's land with many refugees, people that are being left alone with little to no humanitarian support. But nobody wants to move out of this region either. So I don't think it's a new front. I think it's a strategically important place that one should, be careful to contain.
Some really important context there. Middle East expert Daniel Gerlach, thank you so much for that analysis and sharing your expertise. We appreciate it.
Thank you.